Look, I don't think people fully understand how big of a problem Russia is facing right now in Ukraine. It has been a while since I've seen this many Russian commentators and analysts worried about the same issue: logistics. They're just not getting to the front. As one Russian milblogger or war correspondent put it, quote, "The situation is worsening every week," end quote. And other Russian analysts complained that now is the time to actually start the real war, as if they've been holding back, and even questioning whether Putin actually understands the situation at the front. Because surely, if he did, these problems would be resolved. But they're not. And the path to isolating Crimea and the southern occupied territories is becoming clear. Look, logistics are boring. I get it. But if you can't secure your supply lines, you can't hold terrain, which means this little problem that Russia is dealing with actually threatens their entire war effort. Now, this is the type of subject where I think it's valuable to look at the Russian perspective of how things are playing out, not the Ukrainian analysis or the US analysis or the NATO analysis, but what are Russians saying? So in today's video, we have 7 different Russian sources. They range, media personalities, milbloggers, reporters. They range from tens of thousands to millions in terms of the audience that they are speaking to. To give you an idea of how concerned they are right now, we've got a couple here. Russian blogger Vernum Regnum said, quote, "Crimea is effectively blocked. There is no gasoline there, and there may be problems with food supply. In the territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, it has become more dangerous to live there than before the war." In fact, let's go to a map here to give you an idea of the areas we're talking about. This is deep state map, and we'll keep it on this view rather than the satellite view because we're going to stay relatively zoomed out. But looking at this map, the red and purple are Russian occupied territories. And what they're talking about now is Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. And you're going to hear a number of different Russian sources today really start with Crimea, as this is the major issue. But those logistic issues are creeping into Kherson, a little bit to the north, Zaporizhia to the northeast, and they're even starting to notice problems in Luhansk, Donetsk, and historic Russian territory, actual Russian territory. Milblogger Veteran Notes says, quote, "The situation in Crimea is worsening every week, and by the fall, if the situation is not reversed, the peninsula could be in a state of siege." And something I want to stress is I'm trying to grab a lot of different sources here and come at this from a number of different angles. Across the board, these Russian sources are getting nervous, and this is all commentary that they have mentioned in the past 24 to 48 hours. So we're not grabbing some assessment from 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago and patching it together for some story. This is all of these Russian analysts, pro-Russian sources saying, this is a major issue, guys. We've got to figure out a way to resolve this. In fact, one, Maxim Kalishnikov actually talked about how this is all part of Ukraine's big plan this summer, where he actually thinks Ukraine is preparing for a significant counterattack in the south. Again, looking at the map here will be beneficial. Kalishnikov says, quote, "Now, with 90% certainty, we can say that Kyiv's plans for the summer have become clear. First, disrupt logistics and rear area life in our part of Crimea and the Donbass, to disorganize the supply of troops on the land bridge to Crimea, and then, with the main strike, to cut it off, possibly using a diversionary psychological strike according to the Kursk scenario." When he says land bridge, what he's talking about here is you've got Crimea, this peninsula. There's the only way in via land is from the north here or across the Kerch Bridge in the east. Of course, we know that's been targeted a couple times. Russian sources getting increasingly worried it's going to get hit again. But this is the land bridge when that terminology is used, connecting Crimea up through Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk into Russia. One of the initial goals of the war in 2022 was securing this space, and this is what's increasingly coming under threat from Ukrainian drones day in and day out. So Kalishnikov says that this area will be cut off, and then he takes it a step further than I would. He expects a Ukrainian offensive to push into these depleted Russian lines. He says, quote, "What to do in response? We've said it many times, but nothing has changed. After all, the Russian elite has been driving the situation into this trap for years, spinning the carousel or spinning the lies that we are advancing in all directions. Having missed the enemy's seizure of the drone initiative, not only in long-range strikes, but also at medium range. We wait for the reaction of our leadership, expensive in every sense." So what we've seen play out here, first off, I always think it's fascinating to see some kind of pro-Russian analysts talk about, Konstantinivka or Kupiansk or Huliopoli and these different areas where Russian forces are advancing at significant cost. Whereas big picture, if you look at the actual Russians that are trying to win this war, that want Russia to win this war, that live inside of Russia, their concerns are more strategic and operational in nature of, hey, that 1, 2, 3 blocks in Konstantinivka that was taken doesn't matter if we can't supply the troops and if Crimea is going to be completely isolated. They understand the big picture here. They're looking past kind of the propaganda PR pieces of minor flag planting operations. Now, the big change that happened here in recent months is that Ukraine has really developed and rolled out en masse their medium strike drone campaign. So when we say medium strike, kind of breaking this down into the close range strike, call it 30 kilometers and less, the front line, essentially. Both Russia and Ukraine have a significant volume and capabilities in that regard. Middle range, we'll call it 30 to 200 or 300 kilometers. That's the middle range. All right, 300 plus kilometers, then long range. We've seen both Russia and Ukraine carry out a lot of those long range strikes. One of the criticisms that Russia is levying upon themselves right now is they focus too much on exclusively those long range munitions. We know they have a substantial arsenal of these Shahed loitering munitions that are very effective. All right, and they've gotten more and more effective as the war has gone on. Ukraine, over the course of the last 6 to 12 months, has dialed in their production of these medium-range strike drones to knock out Russian air defense and then hammer Russian logistics. What that means is, and Ukraine had this capability, right? And Russia does have the capability, but firing one drone into this area is a nuisance and it gets shot down. But when you fire 100 or more a day into some of these directions, they just saturate the area and plenty of them get through. And what we're seeing recently is Ukraine has the volume of these drones to inflict significant damage. Sticking with our Russian sources here, Russian media Rybar said, quote, "The opponent's intentions are clear. By disrupting logistics of any cargo and passenger communications with Crimea, Ukrainian formations are driving an escalating crisis in Russia's southwestern regions. And the broader population segment it affects, the more difficult it will be to respond. As strikes on various transport routes continue, the beginning of a local Ukrainian offensive becomes quite likely, at least with a publicly stated goal of cutting off the land corridor. Attempts to attack infrastructure around the Crimean Bridge are also possible, and following even minimal tactical successes, the opponent will attempt to inflate them to trigger panic and further exacerbate the crisis." I disagree at this point. I know that's the second analysis we've had now talking about a Ukrainian offensive. That doesn't make sense, at least anytime soon. Cutting off the land bridge would mean some sort of push here. There are still significant Russian defenses all throughout the occupied territory. And right now, Ukraine has this advantage of sitting back in protected locations, a good distance back from the front, and slinging drones into this territory that is inflicting damage every single day. And look, the Russians near the front, they need ammunition, they need water, they need food, they need fuel, they need to add more troops when their troops are killed or wounded, or bring their wounded back. When these roads are effectively shut down, it makes that harder and harder. And there's no reason for Ukraine to push into that until the front lines are almost entirely cut off. Again, there's a bit of a waiting game to be had there. I mean, right now we're seeing it play out. The Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces just put out a note earlier today saying over the past 2 weeks, the cargo traffic on the corresponding section, talking about the occupied territories in Ukraine, has decreased by approximately 71%. They stress that this does not mean a complete blockade of the route, but it indicates a significant restriction of the enemy's logistical capabilities and forces him to use alternative routes. That's a major problem. I mean, when you're talking about sustaining a war effort like this at the front, a 5% reduction, unexpected 5% reduction in frontline supplies could be a major problem. 71%, to be blunt, is catastrophic. Now, what we're seeing is the immediate reaction. Russia does not have a near-term solution to deal with these middle-range strike drones. So we're probably seeing a bit of an overreaction from the Russian side. We've seen roads shut down. We've heard reports at this point, nothing verified, of drivers not being willing to take the risk and to drive on some of these roads that just a few weeks ago seemed safe. 71% cut in logistics. The Russian army will not be able to sustain the front. I'm not going to try to put a timeline on that, but now you're talking about the reallocation of supplies, which units are prioritized, what is prioritized in terms of sending forward. If you go from 10 trucks moving forward to 3. What makes it? Water, food, ammunition, fuel, reinforcements, maybe just less of all of those things. Again, not sustainable for Russia over the long term. We'll see what their response looks like. And we're seeing a number of Russians getting frustrated about this, saying, why aren't we doing anything? What's the issue here? Another milblogger or war correspondent here called Russian People's Militia said, quote, the enemy is methodically laying siege to Crimea, turning it from a peninsula into an island with all the ensuing consequences. And they say, quote, maybe it's time to start fighting for real in the 5th year of the war, not to be confused with the special military operation. Now, one, a little tongue-in-cheek, we've heard this a number of times from kind of the pro-Russia crowd saying, just wait, the real Russian army is right around the corner. As soon as Russia decides to take the gloves off, that'll be it, once and for all. So this situation in Crimea is prompting the crowd, some crowds inside of Russia, to say, what on earth are we doing here? How do we not have this resolved? Russian milblogger Romanov actually questions whether or not Putin even knows about the situation at the front, saying, quote, like an ordinary citizen, the author gets the impression that the president is simply being sidelined with an artificial information bubble being created around him. I think there's some reality to that. And I don't know how long this has been going on, but it's pretty clear that Putin's perspective of the war does not line up with the situation on the ground. And for something like this, where they need a very short-term, immediate solution, that becomes a major problem. You know, if Putin's maps are off by 5, 10, 15 kilometers in certain directions, yeah, that's a problem for the troops on the ground. They can kind of work their way around it. But as it gets up the chain, it tends to have less and less impact on the soldiers at the front. But if Putin does not understand the logistical issue facing the troops right now, again, we're talking about the possibility of areas of the Russian front unable to maintain their positions, collapse. Now, whether or not Ukraine is able to push into that is a different story, but this is a major issue that needs resolving yesterday. In fact, one of the notable things here is that Russia seems to be calling out the Ukrainian objectives here, and they're still not able or not interested to actually stop it. Russian milblogger Military Informant said, quote, Ukraine's plan at this stage is clear, to try to keep the Chongar Bridge blocked off with regular strikes while at the same time hitting trucks, fuel tankers, and military transport that are forced to seek a detour northwest of Crimea and thus closer range to Ukrainian strikes. What he's talking about is there's a number of ways into Crimea, right? You've got the land bridge here. You've got the Sea of Azov, where Ukraine has been striking ships in recent days. You got the Kerch Bridge. There's rail lines moving through some of this area that has been hit in recent days. This bridge in this area, I believe, Chongar, right here. So this bridge right here was hit by Ukraine a couple times in recent days. It was hit. Russia sent out, they closed off traffic, said nobody's moving through here. Before they could get it repaired, they sent out a crew to start working on it, and it got hit again. So traffic, again, at the very least, limited, if not completely shut down. And what Military Informant is complaining about is saying, yeah, they shut that down. Then the only land route into Crimea is closer to the Ukrainian lines. Shorter range, there's another bridge over here. So shorter range means likely more Ukrainian drones able to affect that bridge. So for all of the trucks deciding we can't go this route anymore because it's closed, they have to drive closer to the front into the teeth of the Ukrainian unmanned systems forces. In fact, this ties in with what the commander of that unit just said earlier today. Madhyar, Robert Brovdy, said, quote, from now on, death marches of logistics to Crimea for the occupier are allowed only by detours. This is what we call shaping the initiative or taking the initiative. Russia right now is having to respond to the actions that Ukraine takes. Russia is having to select how they get supplies in and out of Crimea based off of Ukrainian strikes. They didn't have to do this a few months ago. Anytime in any conflict, you can get the adversary to react and put them on their back foot. It is a positive. We're watching that right now as Ukraine has consistently, for a few months now, put Russia on their back foot and forced them to adapt to an environment they're not ready to adapt to. Now, it's not just the logistics that Ukraine is going after. We're seeing some strikes on regional power generation as well. The Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces last night put out this clip saying on the night of June 8th and 9th, units of the Unmanned Systems Forces hit 36 enemy military and infrastructure objects in the operational depth of the temporarily occupied territories. They say in Zaporizhia, they hit a P-18 Terek radar station. In Donetsk, they hit a command and observation point from the Rubicon drone unit, kind of the most elite drone unit in Russia. They also hit 9 power substations. In Luhansk, they say they went after gas infrastructure, fuel, and lubricant tanks. A lot of infrastructure in and around the occupied territories, and Russia is picking up on this as well, with military informants saying, quote, "It's too early to draw far-reaching conclusions, but it is already clear that by the fall, the enemy will have all of the opportunities to cause frequent power outages in the border areas of Russia, especially in the new border areas." Talking about Kherson, Crimea, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. He says, and if the problems with fuel supply are not resolved by this time, then we risk getting a local exclusion zone in the new territories with constant outages of water, electricity, heating, as well as the lack of regular supplies of goods and fuel. To go back to the very beginning of today's video, Russian milblogger Verum Regnum, quote, "Crimea is effectively blocked. It has become more dangerous to live there than before the war." We're watching Ukraine's middle strike campaign play out right now. We are seeing how they are isolating the battlefield. Every single day this goes on, Russia is put in a more and more precarious situation, and they've not yet responded. Again, my estimation is that the response is probably going to be an increase of strikes on civilian infrastructure throughout the country, because ramping up a lot of air defense capabilities, called mobile drone teams, to effectively protect all the occupied territories is not something they're going to be able to get done in a few weeks, probably not even a few months. To deploy that, get those trained, get those resourced, and get them out to where they are able to secure logistics, you're probably talking about a couple months, realistically. And if this pace continues for the next couple months, there's going to be multiple positions along the front line that are out of food, out of water, out of fuel, and out of ammunition. This is a serious problem for Russia playing out every single day. Now, on the other side of that, we're actually helping Ukraine with their logistics, picking up a number of pickup trucks and vans for frontline units in some of the hottest sectors of the front. So this is through Car for Ukraine. We've worked with them before. I think they do a great job of showing, the status of the campaign and then the deliveries. I'll play a video, a couple different pictures and videos here. You can see the vehicles being dropped off inside of Ukraine. They're then driven to the frontline units. And we've got one video right here from the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade thanking you all for the vehicles that, to be blunt, will save lives at the front. Here you go.
Вітаю! Від імені 2-го батальйону безпілотних систем 104-ї окремої бригади Сил територіальної оборони щиро дякуємо Престону Стюарту та його спільноті, а також команді Бандера Мобіль та Кар for Ukraine за цю машину. Ваша підтримка – це наша мобільність та безпека. Машина вже працює на фронті, саме завдяки вам. Разом до перемоги. Слава Україні!
So anyways, for those interested in Able, check out the link in the description below. And there's some great videos in there too from these units that we're supporting, saying thank you, talking about their operations, talking about how these trucks are used in and around the front line. So even if you can't contribute or you don't want to contribute, that link is actually pretty cool. You can see a lot of the details of how this war is playing out, specifically around the need for vehicles on and around the zero line. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.